Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a pretty fascinating look at some sources, pulling out the key stuff for you.
That's right.
We're heading to ancient Egypt, but maybe not the Egypt you're expecting. We've got R.A. Schwaller de Lubicz's book, The Temple and Man, and we're going deep into the Temple of Luxor, looking for, well, hidden wisdom in its actual architecture.
Yeah, this isn't your standard history tour, is it?
Yeah.
Schwaller de Lubicz, he was quite the figure. Studied with Matisse, dabbled in alchemy, made his own stained glass. An artist, really.
Wow.
And he saw Luxor differently, not just ruins, but as a symbol, a living symbol of some ancient wisdom.
Exactly. So forget the usual pharaohs and pyramid stuff for a second. The big idea here is that the Temple of Luxor actually represents man, like a miniature cosmos.
Microcosm, yeah.
And if we can decode its structure, maybe we can unlock this forgotten way of thinking, this quality intelligence he talked about. Okay, so where do we start unpacking that? He mentions 2 levels of Egypt.
That's probably the best place to start, yeah. It's crucial. He draws a line between the Egypt we learn about in school, the history, the dates, the geography, the myths.
The facts and figures.
Right. And something else, something much deeper. He calls it an ever-present and a recurring possibility of consciousness.
So the historical Egypt is like just one expression of this timeless potential.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. He argues that if we really want to get what they were about, we have to try and understand their mindset, their whole way of seeing reality.
Which sounds incredibly difficult. I mean, thousands of years, totally different culture.
It is, absolutely. And he really warns against just projecting our modern, rational, sort of individualistic viewpoint onto them, or onto Vedic India, for that matter.
Right, we just distort it.
Completely. We risk missing the whole point because their values, their whole idea about life's purpose, it was just fundamentally different. And that difference, it's soaked into everything. Their science, art, their language, especially their symbols.
Which brings us to the symbols, right? The Medu-Neteru, that's more than just hieroglyphs, isn't it?
Oh, much more. Schwaller de Lubicz points out that even something basic like numbers, they weren't just abstract quantities for the Egyptians. They were concrete definitions of energetic formative principles. That's how he puts it. These principles were the neters. We translate it as gods often.
Yeah, but maybe that's misleading.
It can be. Think of them less like personal deities and more like fundamental forces, cosmic principles. You know, a bit like how physics talks about gravity or electromagnetism, just governing principles.
Okay, I think I get that. He uses 2 as an example, right? To show it's not just 2.
Exactly. For them, the number 2, it wasn't just a count. It embodied the act of multiplying itself. Duality leading to creation.
Okay.
It represented sexuality, the origin point of nature, which they actually called the neter too. Physis.
Isis. Wow.
Yeah. It symbolized culmination like a full moon, but also abstract things. Movement, spirit. It's packed with meaning.
Yeah. Worlds away from just 1 + 1 = 2. And he also talks about multiplication itself, this crossing idea.
Right. And this is fascinating. They saw this direct connection between maths, like the operation of multiplication, and how life and the universe actually work. He calls it the principle of the crossing.
The crossing, like our X symbol for multiplying.
Kind of, yeah. But for them, that X, that crossing, it wasn't just a shortcut. It symbolized how things actually come into being, how they enter the physical, corporeal world.
So, like male and female crossing to make life, or threads crossing in a weave, that kind of intersection.
Precisely. Or, vertical and horizontal lines crossing to create a surface. Light and dark crossing to define form. Even matter and spirit intersecting to create existence.
Okay.
This kind of vital connection between abstract ideas and the real world gave their science this really deep philosophical underpinning. And their language, the Medu-Neteru, that was also completely different.
Right. He contrasts it with ours. Our words are basically labels, right?
Yep.
Agreed upon sounds linked to ideas strung together logically.
Yeah, fixed associations we memorize. But for the Egyptians, he suggests words had this direct power. They generated sonar fields, he calls them. Like the sound itself vibrated in tune with the essence of the thing.
A sonar intuitional mode of intelligence, understanding through resonance, immediate connection.
Exactly. Very different from our usual analytical visual processing. He even quotes Maspero saying, the priest's voice in the temple was seen as this powerful tool capable of invoking forces. The sound, the order of sounds, was critical. Each had an energy.
Okay, so different mindset, powerful symbols, resonant language.
Yeah.
That sets the stage for understanding the Temple of Luxor itself. He calls it indisputable evidence that a symbolic directive was operative in its architecture.
That's the core argument. Despite all the digging and studying, Schwaller de Lubicz says, look, we still don't really grasp pharaonic Egypt. Not its real science, its psychospiritual knowledge, its philosophy.
We've got tons of artifacts, but we're missing the operating system.
Kind of. And he pushes back against the idea that the deep stuff was deliberately hidden in secret rooms.
So it wasn't about secret codes, but more about being able to understand, having the eyes to see and ears to hear.
Exactly. The mystery isn't buried treasure. It's maybe our own limitations in understanding their whole frame of reference. And he touches on the limits of pure rationalism, too. Relying only on what our senses tell us.
Because our senses only pick up a fraction of what's out there.
Right. So rational thought based only on that sensory data can only take you so far. Even mathematics, he points out, bumps up against concepts that aren't purely physical. Logic hits a wall, and that signals you need other ways of knowing.
And that's where the image, the symbol, really comes in. He talks about how words can be clumsy for abstract ideas, but symbols, they convey qualities, functions, outside of time and space. He uses the example, a man walks.
It's a great example. You say a man walks, and we instantly picture a specific man walking somewhere, sometime. But an image of a walking man that evokes the act of walking itself, its essence. It's not tied down. You could even color the man blue, to suggest something totally abstract about the walking. The symbol defines itself, allows for this direct, intuitive grasp.
He connects this to what he calls the Oriental or pharaonic transcribed symbolic mentality. Ideas are sort of outlined, suggested, but maybe not explicitly nailed down with a label.
Yes, a different way of communicating deep truths. And the fact that these huge temples were built, added to over millennia, that implies something, doesn't it?
Like there must have been a group who knew what they were doing, an elite passing down this knowledge.
It strongly suggests that. A knowledgeable, continuously renewing elite who understood these fundamental laws of life, as he calls them. Why build such complex, enduring things if the meaning was lost on everyone?
Good point. So what was the key for him at Luxor? How did he start decoding it? He found 3 axes on the platform.
Yes, that was a breakthrough. Not just one central line, but 3. A geometric, astronomical one down the middle, then a general axis for overall measures, and another one inside the sanctuary, the horary axis of Amun, tied to time, the sun's movement.
3 different guiding lines.
Right. And each one influenced where walls and columns went, sometimes in ways that look a bit off visually to us. But it highlights that the layout wasn't just physical orientation, it was deeply symbolic too.
And then he found the characteristic symbol in those weird paving stones in the covered part.
That was huge. These paving stones, they aren't smooth or regular, more like a rough mosaic. But he realized they weren't random, they actually form shapes.
Shapes? Like what?
He traced the outline of an eye, the shape of an ear, and the line of the trachea, the windpipe. And then incredibly, there's a carving in one room, room 20, that shows the exact same profile formed by those stones.
No way. An eye, ear, windpipe, and the floor. And this profile, this leads to the big idea, right? The human body is the actual blueprint for the temple.
Exactly. This is the core. He carefully superimposed a diagram of a human skeleton onto the temple's floor plan. And the alignment was astonishing. The head fits perfectly within the covered sanctuaries. The innermost room lines up with the mouth cavity. Key walls mark the collarbones. The main hypostyle hall corresponds to the chest.
Wow.
You could even check the skeleton's proportions against the temple's actual measured dimensions. The insight is profound. They saw man as the microcosm, and the temple is literally a map of that inner reality.
And the golden number, phi, that ratio we see in nature, that's in there too.
Oh, yes. He shows how the golden number, which dictates growth patterns in shells, plants, animals,
Yeah, sure.
it appears all over the place in the proportions of the human body and in the temple's design. It connects them.
Okay, so the body is the plan, and those paving stones, the eye, ear, mouth profile, but you said it was missing the top of the head.
Significantly, yes. The profile formed by the stones and seen in that carving stops short of the crown of the skull. We'll come back to why that's so important.
Okay, and what about that carving of men? A moon with the erect phallus, where does that fit?
Symbolically, it's placed right where the urethra would be on this overlaid human form.
Yeah.
But anatomically on the wall, it's positioned at the navel.
Huh. Why the navel?
Schwaller connects this to the golden number again, and the navel's significance in bodily proportion, but also to this idea of self-conception, Adamic creation, he calls it, a kind of spiritual birth of man independent of a mother figure.
Okay, deep stuff.
Yeah.
He also mentions finding little keys in the stonework. Not mistakes, but guides.
Right. Tiny, seemingly insignificant bits of stone left intentionally in walls or floors. They weren't errors by the sculptors, they were precise reference points, measurement guides for the master builders.
Wow.
Shows the incredible care and precision involved. He really urges Egyptologists to look closer at these details, not dismiss them.
And then these concepts, transposition and transparency, as ways of embedding meaning. Can you break those down?
Yeah, they're really clever symbolic methods. Transposition is where, say, a theme starts on one wall, maybe a depiction of the sacred boat, the bark, but it's shown empty. Then, maybe across the courtyard, or on the other side of a wall, in a room dedicated to the boat's symbolic contents, you find what belongs in it. The meaning is completed across space.
Okay. And transparency.
That's where the stone wall itself seems to act as a bridge. You have an image on one side, another on the other, and the wall between them is part of the symbolism, indicating a vital connection or exchange between the two concepts depicted. It's not about hiding things. It's about illustrating how functions are interconnected.
Okay, back to that missing crown of the skull and the head profile. That felt important.
It's absolutely central to his interpretation. Schwaller points out that Egyptian art consistently shows this clear dividing line at the top of the head. A headband, a diadem, sometimes just a line suggesting a joint. And in their system for measuring the body, the canon of proportions, the crown is often left out. It seems small, but it reveals a huge difference between how the Egyptians, and later the Greeks, saw humanity.
How so? What does leaving out the top of the brain signify?
He links the head without the crown to the covered temple, the inner sanctuary area. This represents the core of human consciousness, the essential being. Separating the crown, he argues, symbolizes a kind of fall.
A fall from what?
A fall from a state of, let's say, direct, unified, divine intelligence into our current state, into transitory nature. The dual brain, left and right hemispheres, becomes linked to sexual differentiation, to our rational, cerebral intelligence, the intelligence of the created world, not the creator.
Whereas the Greeks included the crown.
Yes, their ideal proportions represented natural man, fully embedded in the physical world, crown included. The Egyptian depiction without the crown points to something else.
He mentions animal experiments too, removing the cerebrum.
Yes, decerebralized animals. They show that the basic life functions continue, but spontaneity, personal judgment, higher thought, that's gone. The animal acts purely on instinct. It highlights the cerebrum's role, the part symbolized by the crown in our individual consciousness and discernment.
So the head without the crown, it could represent a state before nature, this Adamic man, or maybe a state after transcending nature, a Superman state, closer to the divine but conscious.
Exactly. It holds that dual potential, pre-natural existence and post-natural or supernatural existence. He also makes a quick comparison, suggesting the bony plates and sutures of the skull might even visually relate to the scarab beetle.
The scarab, symbol of rebirth.
Yeah, a powerful symbol of transformation, especially important to the very pharaohs involved with Luxor. Just a possible visual link, he notes.
This all feeds into their whole philosophy of measure, doesn't it? It wasn't just about lengths and widths for them.
Not at all. For the Egyptians, measure was fundamental. It had this universal meaning, linking earthly things to heavenly principles. Vital equivalence, as he calls it.
So measure is the quantitative definition of irreducible magnitudes. What are those magnitudes?
He outlines this basic order: origin, mass, space path like time or movement, volume, force, and energy. A kind of foundational structure of reality.
And their unit, the cubit, wasn't fixed like our meter or foot.
That's the key. It was often variable. The length of the cubit could change depending on what was being measured and why. Its symbolic purpose mattered.
He gives that amazing example of measuring trees.
Right. Using different cubits for different types of trees, based on which meter, which principle the tree was associated with. It shows how alive their system of measurement was. It wasn't abstract, it was vital.
Even the hieroglyph for the cubit includes the meter sign.
Exactly, reinforcing that link between the principle and its quantitative expression.
And the fathom measurement used in Luxor, also symbolic, linked to the golden number.
Yes. He tracks the consistent use of the fathom and a specific sacred fathom. Here, the golden number isn't just about pleasing proportions. It's fundamental. It's the link, the mathematical bridge between the metaphysical state and the physical state. That's what makes it sacred.
So even the temple's basic plan, its orientation, that's all loaded with meaning too.
Absolutely. He talks about different foundation types, building on virgin ground versus using old blocks, each having symbolic weight. The temple platform itself acts like a drawing board for tracing out these geometric functions tied to the temple's purpose.
And the weird angles inside aren't mistakes.
No, they're intentional. They express symbolic relationships. And those three axes we talked about, they give the whole structure a sense of movement, a living state.
Orientation, too. Facing a certain direction wasn't just practical.
It had practical aspects, sure, aligning with the sun, but also mystical ones. He mentions the difficulty of compasses there, the reliance on the sun, but also the symbolic weight they gave to left and right, and how they viewed south as the direction of realization, north as inspiration.
Which finally brings us right back to the title, The Temple in Man, the actual physiological symbolism.
Yeah, and this is where Schwaller really pulls it all together. He argues the temple is a conscious diagram of the human body. Know thyself, made manifest in stone.
Those openings in the floor matching organs in the head outline.
Precisely. And the missing crown of the skull, reinforcing that idea of the fall into our current state of consciousness, or maybe pointing towards transcending it.
You mentioned the closed nasopharyngeal opening symbolizing a prenatural state, before breathing.
Exactly. It represents the state before the first breath animates the natural man. Before that, the Niederman, the potential being, exists through the inner ear, their symbol for direct inspiration. The whole respiratory path is even mapped along the temple's axis.
And swallowing connects to the inner ear and concentration.
He makes that link, yeah. How the eustachian tube opens when we swallow, and how we often instinctively swallow to focus. A kind of calling to the inner ear for inner guidance.
There's so much detail. Room 12 for the eye, Horus, the hours, the medulla oblongata and spinal nerves near the sacred bark.
It's incredibly detailed. He interprets the later Neos of Alexander as symbolizing an opening to past knowledge, introducing duality. He talks about transposed walls in the south representing internal exchanges in the head, like the choroid plexuses.
And that transparent wall between rooms representing smell.
Right, linking the lamina, tuberosa, and olfactory bulb. Symbols of cloths on one side, boxes for cloths on the other, representing the interwoven olfactory nerves, smell being the oldest, most primal brain sense.
And the way the depiction shifts from a profile head to a full-face chest, but the spine stays on the west wall, it just feels so deliberate.
It does. And Schwaller really contrasts this detailed anatomical and physiological symbolism with the, frankly, limited knowledge Egyptologists usually attribute to the ancient Egyptians.
Right.
He brings up Pythagoras being initiated into these secrets and how Herodotus famously kept silent about certain sacred Egyptian wisdom. There was clearly a deep, complex knowledge system there.
He talks about the body chest, abdomen as the corporeal being, and the head as the container of the spiritual, where blood is somehow spiritualized, and the pineal gland.
Yes, he discusses the head's role in transforming the vital fluids. And he speculates about the pineal gland, the pineal eye, its role around puberty, and where it might be symbolically located within the temple's structure. It all ties back to the Needers not just being myths, but representing a unified system. Medicine, astronomy, theology, all one knowledge.
So the big picture is, man is the individualization of cosmic harmony, the microcosm.
Exactly.
And consciousness is the temple in man, which comes from understanding these deep functions of Genesis. He also contrasts their way of thinking, this vitalist mentality, with our more direct Western approach.
Right. The vitalist mentality is focused on inner experience, on reaction, like seeing an afterimage, you're experiencing something triggered internally, not just the external object.
Oh.
Their indirect mentality, he says, worked by presenting concrete facts or symbols to provoke an inner response, an awakening. It's about genuine experience modifying your innate consciousness. He uses the analogy of needing to exhale fully before you can truly inhale deeply. The complement provokes the action.
Instead of just focusing on the objective thing, they focused on the inner reaction to it.
Precisely. It's about awakening the mental aspect through provoking a reaction, leading to real experience.
Lastly, he gets into the actual artistic canon, the grid system they use for drawing people.
The 19 squares for a standing figure, yeah. He shows how landmarks like the knee, shoulders, forehead align with specific grid lines, and how the golden section applies to the profile view. But interestingly, the head-to-body proportions actually vary in the Luxor reliefs.
Depending on the meaning.
Likely, yes, depending on the symbolic intent. He even analyzes the proportions of that head shape in the pavement.
And suggests it matches a 12-year-old, linking it to Jesus in the temple.
It's a fascinating parallel he draws, yes. The proportions suggest that age. And different parts of the temple seem to correspond to different life stages. The covered temple, like a newborn, the pylons, maybe an 18-year-old.
And that relief of 5 kings representing life stages.
He interprets them as showing 5 key changes, shifts of axis corresponding to ages. And one king, King B, has a subtly different profile, suggesting the changes around puberty, mirroring the temple's whole theme of growth, transformation, becoming.
Wow, that's a lot.
It really is. The level of interconnected detail is just staggering. It makes a powerful case for the Temple of Luxor as this incredibly sophisticated symbolic teaching tool, a real temple in man.
So pulling this all together, our deep dive into Schwaller de Lubicz really paints the Temple of Luxor in a completely different light. It's not just old stones, it's like a deliberate architectural book.
A book in stone, yeah. Designed to explain this incredibly deep ancient Egyptian view of the cosmos, of humanity's place in it, and even the secret workings inside us.
Revealing how connected their science, their philosophy, their spirituality really were. It wasn't separate boxes like we tend to think now.
Not at all. It was a unified understanding.
Which leaves us with a pretty big thought for you, the listener. If we take this perspective, this way of looking deep into the Temple of Luxor, how might that change how we see other ancient sites, other civilizations?
Right. What if we started looking beyond just the historical facts or the functional purpose? What if we considered the psycho-spiritual dimensions, the symbolic meanings potentially encoded in other ancient structures?
What other books and stone might just be waiting for us to, well, do a similar doom dive?
A question worth pondering.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this exploration into the temple and man.